Welcome everyone from near and far who has joined this evening. I'll begin with a brief recap on last week's presentation, and then I'll proceed to an exploration of the 5 spiritual faculties, both as a guide to the development of a whole life, examining also the altruistic or other regarding aspects of the faculties, which will then briefly look, if I have time, as to how the different Buddhist schools are aligned to each of the faculties, and how the makeup of our Triratna order both contains and expresses the faculties collectively. So, to remind us all, the faculties are faith, or Shraddha, wisdom, or Prajna, mindfulness, Smriti, concentration or meditation, which is Samadhi, and energy, which is Virya. I spoke of faith last week as a confidence trust in the Buddha as an enlightened human being. And from that, we draw great confidence in his teachings that led him to that state of awakening. The teachings we call the Dharma. Faith is much an emotional attitude, an intuitive heart response, if you will. Wisdom is a deep knowing, an apprehension by seeing cognitively into the Four Noble Truths. The truth of suffering, the truth of the cause of suffering, the truth that there is an end of suffering, and the truth that there is a path to lead to the end of suffering, the Noble Eightfold Path. Mindfulness is a faculty that contains a progressive cultivation of awareness within the framework of the 4 foundations of mindfulness. And that includes an accurate recognition of mental and emotional states, attitudes and motives, as much as it does of our physical composition, sensations, body parts and feelings. Mindfulness also includes the constant recollection of our purpose of practice. That is, the overarching remembering of why we are doing what we're doing. Concentration, meditation, or samadhi is the meditative development of increasingly refined states of consciousness that are skillful, that is based on goodwill, wisdom, and generosity, and progressively liberating us from a confined and reactive mind towards an expansive and creative mind. The energy faculty refers to the energy in pursuit of the good, the skillful, the ethical, the liberation of mind in accordance with the Noble Eightfold Path. Whatever we are engaged in, we are always making efforts to transform unskillful mental and emotional states into skillful ones, such as recognizing ill will and then cultivating goodwill. The same for selfish desire, cultivating that towards open-handed generosity, and cultivating ignorance to wisdom, and so on. Of course, we face these opportunities, whether meditating, working, relating to people, and relating to the whole animate and inanimate world around us, and so on. In fact, while we are conscious, we have opportunity at every moment to shape the mind and heart. A little reflection will show us how much each faculty informs the other. For this reason, the Buddha recommended that we aim for balance or harmony of the faculties. If we're overzealous on the energy front, particularly with physical activities, commitments, outreach, and so on, at the expense of quality quiet time and meditation, we may miss out on sensitivity and insight afforded by loving kindness and mindfulness meditations. Likewise, if we are mostly informed by our heart's response, by faith alone, there is the danger of becoming overly credulous and vulnerable to any teaching or teacher that comes our way. We need the balance of reasoned thinking and examination that has been honed in the Dharma and recognizes whether the universal principles are present and if the teaching or practices before us lead to skillfulness and liberation. We need that discriminative faculty of wisdom. Conversely, An excessively intellectual, heady or cognitive approach without the heart involvement will lead to a dry, colourless and overly rational life, weak in devotion, compassion and generosity. The fulcrum or balance point for the harmonizing of these pairs of faculties is mindfulness, awareness. We can't have too much of that. We can't have an excess of awareness. After all, enlightenment can be seen as unbounded awareness. So if awareness is always growing, we're moving in the right direction to enlightenment. So that's the recap. This evening's material, I'd like to explore two ways of looking at the spiritual life. Why is that? Well, simply sometimes looking at things from different angles, different things appeal to different people, and also different views can help us see how things work out between the parts and the whole. Sometimes with the wealth of the Buddha's teaching that we have before us, the many avenues of practice, the different doctrines from all the different schools, from 2,500 years of this faith, it can get a little bit confusing and overwhelming. But if we have these 5 faculties and look at how they operate through slightly different lenses, it will probably help us understand how the whole life of development evolves. So let's first have a look at a spiritual life that develops out of the faculties in sequence. Most people will come to the Dharma by meeting the Buddha in some way. And from there is the spark of faith arises, the confidence, trust in the Buddha as an enlightened human being, someone who had a profound wisdom and a limitless compassion that communicated to a vast number of people and in a way changed his world and the world after him, and is still resonating through us right to this day. And that is why we have come together tonight. It is because of the Buddha, an enlightened human being. So really the whole path of change doesn't begin until faith arises. Of course, that faith may be triggered, the search for the Buddha will be triggered by the experience of dukkha, seeing something in life that is not quite satisfactory, doesn't add up, or does not inspire us. So we go searching for meaning, we go searching for mystery, and in our case, we found the Buddha. So by recognizing the Buddha and his teachings, we have a growing confidence, trust. On finding the Buddha, there is this rising of faith or shraddha that brings with it joy and energy, enthusiasm to practice, to go deeper, to go further, to meet the Buddha, to meet Buddha mind. And by this urge, this energy, we then take on meditation. Meditations incorporating mindfulness practices, loving kindness, and its various refractions, such as compassion. When metta meets suffering, compassion arises. Sympathetic joy. When metta meets someone who's happy, we are just sympathetically happy with them. And if there is no particular object, metta becomes equanimity, the very even-mindedness, even heart. And when loving kindness is mature. Meditation can be seen as a continuous expansion of mind in all its breadths and depths. And progress naturally requires an inclination, an interest, and motivation to meditate. It requires dedication of discipline. It also requires favorable conditions and also guidance. Wisdom, the wisdom faculty, is insight into the nature of reality, and along with it comes attendant, unshakable faith in the Buddha and his Dharma, and an ethical purity. All of these things eventually evolve as the crown of this sequence, if we see the spiritual life as a sequence of faculties evolving. However, consciously, we don't practice it 1, 2, 3. We don't come up and say, well, I'll start off with just by cultivating faith and do all of that. We're actually doing all of these things. We're trying meditation. We're looking at our ethical life. We're making friends. We're trying to be more generous and so on. But we can naturally see that a life evolves in this way in dependence upon faith, arises energy and meditation, wisdom, and so on. Now, another way of looking at a spiritual life is seeing our lives as these evolving processes of integration, the emergence of increasingly positive emotion, insight into the nature of our limited mind, and breakthrough into a whole new consciousness and finding the liberation of unfettered energy for the benefit of all beings. These 5 great stages were described in some centuries after the Buddha by one of the Mahayana schools, and it is a very interesting way of looking at a spiritual life, because it really both incorporates all the faculties and also lets us see ourselves in quite simple and basic ways. We use the word integration because the integration is the unification or progressive unifying of our skillful mental, emotional, and physical energies, which is achieved by deeper self-awareness. So much of our behavior, moment to moment and day to day, is habitual and therefore unconscious. But once these patterns are spotted, once they are seen, there is the prospect of a creative use of our psychic energies, liberating what be repressed, resolving conflicted urges, and so on. We also might find the energy to aspire, to achieve new things. All of these things might open up when the unconscious is revealed. Knowing ourselves deeply allows us to be much more effective in meeting the world and engaging skillfully and helpfully, because we know ourselves, both our strengths and our weaknesses, and we can work creatively with them to be of benefit to the others. So here's the altruistic or other regarding aspect of becoming more aware through mindfulness. And mindfulness is a key faculty in this process, the process of integration. And this is an ongoing thing. It's not something that just happens all at once with the first or the second or the 100th practice of the mindfulness of breathing. It is something that just keeps happening over the years, over the decades. We get to know ourselves more deeply, more intimately. We become more creative in dealing with our energies, working on our faults or our deficiencies, and also strengthening our strengths and refining our strengths and our energies. So integration is an ongoing practice, but there must be a certain amount of integration before the next stage can become solid and take good footing on it. But just before I leave integration, I thought an example would be helpful here. Looking back on my life, my livelihood of medicine, it can be seen also in a parallel of the trajectory of integration. The more self-aware I became, if you like, the more mature, the better equipped I was to communicate, empathize with my patients and their families and my colleagues, and conduct myself in an at times complex occupation with more dignity and care. So personal integration led to me, I think, becoming a better doctor. And I think we could say the same of any livelihood when integration is happening. So as we integrate, we also develop more self-confidence and positive self-regard. So we then have a good basis for cultivating the metta bhavana, or the meditation to cultivate unconditional loving kindness or goodwill, universal goodwill. There are many positive consequences to such a mood, as we know. It is the basis of generosity, the basis of compassion. It is kindness without condition, reservation, or limitation. That's our aim. With a heart full of metta, when we look up to the Buddha or exemplary spiritual mentors, devotion arises and faith grows. Devotion is metta looking up. Gratitude is a natural and common feeling that leads to devotion, and I think it's part and parcel of devotion. I can certainly say that in my experience of outward devotional practice to the Buddha, bowing before the Buddha figure and the shrine and so on, that came at a particular point when I felt overwhelming gratitude for the teachings that I'd been given when I was at the London Buddhist Centre in the 80s. I was learning the Dharma, I was practicing meditation, my life was improving enormously and the horizons were opening as I got closer and closer to the Dharma and to the Sangha of the people there. And I just felt overwhelming gratitude to the Buddha for going out and teaching, and then 2,500 years later, this wonderful Dharma had come to me. And so I just wanted to offer a stick of incense to the Buddha and just say, thank you for everything. And I bowed. And then as my faith has grown over the years, it is natural for me to bow, even to prostrate before the Buddha when I am inclined, when I am receptive to what I've been given. So I think gratitude is something that we can look for and we can express even at a very simple level, whether it's to the Buddha or to the person who perhaps gives you a teaching or gives you a help or a hand. And of course, there's a gratitude practice which extends out to everyone around us, from our parents to our family, to our friends, to our educators, and so on. I think if we can open up the heart with gratitude, it is much more likely that we'll develop our devotional practice. Another interesting product of deepening faith is the diminishment of fear. I think the more faithful we become, the more devoted, the more confident we are in the Dharma and this method of human development, we become less fearful. So much fear is based on spiritual ignorance, fear of change, fear of loss, and so on. The greater grasp of reality we have, with deep confidence, trust in the Dharma, the less there is to worry about. Because we know things will change. There is a certain amount of things we can do to effect change positively and to prevent suffering, and there's some things we can't. And when that understanding goes deep and is still supported and perfused by kindness and compassion, fear becomes less and less of an issue. And these qualities do actually calm, reassure, and inspire the people around us. That's something I've noticed for sure. Both myself feeling calmer, reassured, and stronger in the presence of people who are stronger than me in the faces of adversity, or confusion. This almost becomes a gift of fearlessness, which is said to be one of the great gifts of the Buddha, the gift of fearlessness. You may see Buddha figures with the right hand in front of the heart, open palm out. This is the Abhaya Mudra, the gesture of fearlessness. Abhaya is one of the qualities of the enlightened mind. And of course, enlightenment is an evolving process. Wisdom is a deepening thing, like the floor of the great ocean deepens steadily. And that's what wisdom does. And enlightenment is some remarkable horizon of this ever-deepening wisdom. And through example, we rise to another level of confidence. So in this stage of positive emotion, the second stage, faith, is the key faculty. And with this faith comes the urge to study, reflect, and meditate, to take the whole path further. These are the conditions by which wisdom comes. When we have the robust self-confidence and confidence, trust in the Buddha and his Dharma, to explore more deeply the conditional, impermanent, and insubstantial nature of existence. Here then, wisdom is the predominant faculty. Seeing our limited selves more clearly, there is a gradual dissipation of the habit-encrusted fixed self-view for the emergence of a liberated mind, creative, unfettered, fearless, and equanimous. Meditation, indeed deep concentration at this stage, or Samadhi, gives access to profound experience, turning us about in the deeper seat of consciousness, irreversibly. At this point, meditation, concentration, or samadhi is the faculty. We then naturally obey the urge to live more cleanly, ethically, and selflessly, all hopefully in the company of like-minded seekers, and in particular the spiritually mature, our mentors. The people around us, our families, friends, workmates, acquaintances, are often impressed with the changes that come with such insights, and some may even choose to follow the path with us. I hear these stories not uncommonly. They happen between friends. One friend is engaged in the path, someone else joins them, they pick it up too. Also between spouses is not uncommon. I was ordained with a friend in 1992 called Stirika, his ordained name was. He was living in Sydney with his wife. He got into the Dharma because his wife was feeling a bit anxious. They'd had a long and difficult relationship with her son who was on a downward spiral. And she wanted to relax, so she went to the Sydney Buddhist Centre to do some meditation. It was all a bit foreign to her. So she said, husband, can you come along with me? I don't know these people. I'm doing some meditation course, but I've got to do something. He said, sure, I'll come along. So they both went along and did a meditation course at the Sydney Buddhist Centre, and they got involved in the Dharma. They began to train for ordination, went to retreats, and both entered the order eventually. So we do affect the people around us. We are always affecting the people around us. With the Dharmic path, we are doing it, we are developing ourselves consciously, but also with the benefit of others in mind. And that is also a very important aspect to the altruistic dimension of every stage and every faculty. So having progressively integrated, having refinement of positive emotion in all its aspects, having seen deeply into the nature of ourselves and reality, and turned about on the deeper seat of consciousness with profound concentration and meditation, we now have a liberation of energy that will manifest as limitless compassionate activity. It is enabled by the emergence of an unfettered mind, imbued with robust positive emotion and great receptivity to the conditions and sufferings of all beings. At this point, all the faculties are balanced: wisdom with faith, energy with meditation, by the function of awareness and mindfulness. At this stage, the overarching recollection of purpose is always present, allowing checks and balances to be made moment to moment or day to day. We can imagine this state to be of immeasurable benefit to others and the world at large. This altruistic dimension of a spiritual life defines the bodhisattva, a being wholly intent on the liberation of all beings. Here, energy is the key faculty. There's a beautiful illustration of such a time with our founder Sangharakshita in 1956. There was a great Indian Minister of Law at the time, Dr. Ambedkar, who had made a conversion from his Hindu caste background into Buddhism, which is free of caste. He took the 3 refuges to the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, and the 5 precepts from an ordained Theravadan monk in Nagpur in central India before, I think, a gathering of 100,000 people. It was an enormous amount of people. It might have been more. And this was a momentous occasion because Ambedkar, with his brilliant mind, his learning, had reckoned that no matter how many laws he could effect and have passed by the Indian Parliament, or whatever he could do, there would still be this shadow of caste upon so many people. So Ambedkar said, I've just got to move out of this whole socio-religious framework. And he only saw the alternative, viable alternative, was the Dharma, the Buddha Dharma. So he converted to Buddhism, and all those hundreds of thousands of people with him at Nagpur made the conversion as well. But a few weeks later, the poor man died. I think he was diabetic, he had heart disease. He wasn't an old man, but he died suddenly. And this left this vast number of people bereft of their leader. And these people came to Sangharakshita, who was living up north in India, Kalimpong, in the foothills of the Himalaya. And they said to Sangharakshita, can you help us? Can you help teach all these people some of the basics of the Dharma so they have something to go on and effect the refuges and precepts that they had taken with Dr. Ambedkar at their great Nagpur gathering. So that's what Sangharakshita did. He went down on this massive tour through Maharashtra in central India and out to the west, and just did meeting after meeting, night after night, speaking, usually through a translator, either translating into Hindi or through the dialect Marathi, or if it was elsewhere, another dialect, through translator. So you can imagine these lectures were long because everything was being said twice. And all the conditions that India brings, whatever temperature it is in summer or whatever rain comes along in the rainy season, the talks went on, the translations went on. And Sangharakshita just had this limitless energy to give the Dharma night after night to these people who had ears wide open to hear the Dharma. And he says in one of his memoirs that he had this enormous energy as though he didn't even have conscious control of it. It was as if something else was driving him, as though there was some great presence behind him, almost on his shoulder, which gave him the thought, the energy, the inspiration to meet these people night after night for weeks on end. That is the activity of a bodhisattva. It is this limitless compassionate activity which is marked by a pure energy. And we all have our moments of this, I think, when such things happen. We aim to practice so these moments come more often in our lives, and eventually we hope they become a continuum. We can see these developments both in ourselves individually, but also collectively. And it's interesting that Dante Chitta introduced me by speaking about some of the projects we've had through the Melbourne Buddhist Centre, and that, of course, involves a collective. It requires a lot of people coming together with the same motive, the same inspiration, the same ideals, to bring all their energies together to make something greater than the sum of their parts. And over the years, it's been a greatly satisfying thing to be part of all the projects in starting the Melbourne Buddhist Centre with the order members Buddhadasa and friends here in 1989, renting a little room out in the local community centre, taking in the books, taking in the cushions, setting up the shrine, packing it all down again that night, week after week. And then we hired some premises just off Lygon Street there for some 20 years. That was a renovation. I wasn't part of that because I was overseas being ordained. And then we ran the centre and the classes, and then we opened up another centre in the city for 5 years and had day classes in the city. And we had a wonderful Sangha gathering for a whole year to renovate this space in a CBD building to make it a Buddhist centre in the centre of the city. And then more recently, under Siladas's chair, we purchased this beautiful building we have now in David Street. And it was wonderful to be part of that property search, wonderful to help it come to fruition, see our new chair, Dante Chitta, and a wonderful team on management committee, everyone working together to do all these things, the renovation, the floor, the changes. It's just been a beautiful, beautiful thing. And so many people have been positively affected just by stepping into the space. This is extremely rewarding. And when everyone is working this way together with the same confidence, the same faith, there is almost a third order of consciousness rising, something beyond the individual effects of consciousness, something that in a way transcends the individual completely, that comes when we all work together harmoniously. So that is what I wanted to say on the two ways of looking at spiritual life. One in terms of faculties arising one upon the other to mature them all and to mature a spiritual life. Another way is just looking at what are the processes we go through in a spiritual life of integration, positive emotion, spiritual insight, turning about on the deepest seat of consciousness, and the limitless compassion activity. They're just two ways of looking at it, but we can see how the faculties are operating in all. And I hope you have got a sense of the altruistic dimension that is involved in all of these. I'll just finish now with just some items of interest, I think, about the 5 spiritual faculties and their influence on the development of different Buddhist schools, just as a way to help clarify the way we regard the different schools. Can all be so different, the Zen schools, the Tibetans, the Theravadins, the Pure Lands, and so on. But the 5 spiritual faculties do give us a little bit of a handle on seeing where these schools are coming from and what is their principal current or direction of practice. For the faculty of faith, there's a large number of schools, particularly in Japan, which originally came from China, called the Pure Land schools. So this is where the principal practice really is reliance on this vow of one of the Buddhas of remote times called Amitabha, who will bring everyone to the Pure Land in their next birth, where they will inevitably gain enlightenment if they can remember Amitabha's vow and remember Amitabha's name. So they recite this little mantra called the Nembutsu to remind them of Amitabha and the vow. And that is the whole principal guide. A lot of things are secondary to that. But that is an example of the Pure Land schools. And they're probably the biggest sector of Buddhism in Japan. And they certainly have a major part in China as well. The wisdom schools were based probably on the Madhyamaka school, which had as its founder a great practitioner called Nagarjuna from about the 2nd or 2nd century out of the Common Era. And he was a remarkable mind, sometimes called the second Buddha. And he used argument and reasoning to show that argument and reasoning will not get you enlightened. And of course, he was also working off great faith and a lot of practice of meditation as well. There's no particular school now extant that we'll call a wisdom school, but these wisdom schools in Nagarjuna had a massive influence over everyone else subsequently in the development of Buddhism across countries and cultures and centuries. The energy faculty is probably well represented by the Vajrayana schools. These are mostly the Tibetan schools. There's also some in China and Japan. Japan is the Shingon school, of course associated with the great Saint Kukai. So the Vajrayana is really where there's a strong dependence on the teacher-pupil relationship, a massive trust there. And that with Vajrayana, almost any method is able to be used to help open someone's mind, see more clearly and make changes. Everything goes, magic, alcohol, sex, anything, but it's all done under strict guidance of the master. So it's not one to take on as an individual. And that influences a lot of the Tibetan schools, the Vajrayana. Meditation schools, there was a movement back in the about nearly 1,000 years after the Buddha's passing. There's a number of great figures who developed this, what's called the Yogacara school or mind-only school. And this was looking at the fact that meditation reveals that everything is basically mind. It's about perception. Without mind, there is no perception. So everything we think, feel, believe, perceive, and change is all based on mind. So this led to a lot of schools which focused on meditation. And certainly we can see the Chan and Zen schools, China and Japan, with emphasis on meditation being greatly influenced by the Yogacara from India. Mindfulness as a faculty probably doesn't have a dedicated school, but mindfulness, of course, perfuses every aspect of Buddhism. Even to be mindful, to remember to do the Nembutsu as a faith follower, we have to have that recollection of purpose and remember to do it. So there's some mindfulness there, of course. The Theravadins, which is the predominant Buddhist schools in Southeast Asia, Thailand, Burma, Sri Lanka, the Theravadins clearly revere the Satipatthana Sutta, which I mentioned last week, that key sutta, which deals with the 4 foundations of mindfulness. And they recite that. They'll probably have the text wrapped up in beautiful cloths on the shrine by the Buddha. It really is a key practice for them, for sure. And mindfulness is certainly central to Theravadan practice. But all of these schools, of course, all include the other faculties. But by dint of their evolution in the practice, there's a slight emphasis on one particular faculty. And this, of course, makes it attractive to different temperaments. Finally, in Triratna, just a few things. There's probably a lot more to say about this, so I'll just keep this very brief. But we can even see in our school that there are the faculties which are playing out in certain ways. And here's an interesting one. In Triratna, we have these things that Sangharashtra called institutions. They just simply are ways of doing things as a collective by which we can help people develop spiritually. So having the Melbourne Buddhist Centre as an institution run by people, for people, is an institution, and it's set up in a certain way. It has a chair, it has a committee elected by its association members, all based on principles of spiritual commitment to the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, and seeing Sangharashtra as our principal teacher. And we operate in certain ways. We do meditations in certain ways. We have certain types of devotional practices. So we have a system of practice. And this is preserved by our institution because of its efficacy. Institutions are there to serve things that help people develop and find wisdom and compassion. And that is the function of an institution. But to keep institutions on course, we have to have that balancing function of mindfulness and awareness. So everybody in the centre, involved in the centre, from the chair Danta Chitta, the treasurer Vira Siddhi, the secretary Apada, and all the people on the committee, and all the order members and the mitras and the friends contributing, need to keep reminding, what is our purpose? What are we trying to do here? And that way we stay on the same page, looking in the same direction, trying to do the best we can for our aims and purposes. And that's where we need that recollection of purpose, that mindfulness in our collective endeavours at the centre. Energy faculty is reflected through our practices. Meditation, Pudra mentioned. We also have retreats. We have all sorts of other things which engage people's energy positively. Even having some fun stuff, some social stuff, having a skills auction to raise money, having a film night. These are enjoyable, uplifting, good fun, and they are always to a good end to help us serve the Dharma more efficiently. Wisdom, the faculty of wisdom, obviously there in the Dharma we offer to people, and the practices that we invite people to try. And also we try to affect this wisdom and the ways of offering wisdom and the Dharma through imagination. We try to be very creative in the way we present things, creative in the way we set up our centre, creative in the way we invite. We try to be creative in our websites, creative in the way we speak to people or lay out the centre or the tea bar. All of these things require imagination, and we can do that at all different levels. The faculty of faith is reflected in the principal ideas that we have inherited from the Buddha, and we are trying to reproduce in our time and place in history. Here we're in an English-speaking world, a modern, industrial, affluent world. We have to be creative in the way we see or present things like, say, the principle of renunciation, which I mentioned last week, that as we get deep, we enjoy greater faith, we enjoy more simplicity in life, we need less stimulation of things, we don't have the need to acquire more stuff. We have a simple life and we're able to just naturally renounce or just naturally let a lot of things just fall away. But we need to be creative in the way we present this, and this is of course all based on our faith in the Buddha and the Dharma and its efficacy for all human beings. Meditation, Samadhi. Well, here Sangharashtra has spoken about experimentation. Meditation, particularly in the sense of trying to reorient our consciousness, if you like, or transform our consciousness, does require some experimentation. At the individual level, when we're meditating, we will be trying different things out to deal with this hindrance or that, or to cultivate this dhyana factor or that, or how to get the metta going. How can I do, what can I experiment with just to get this feeling of goodwill running or established, or how can I get over ill will, and so on. There we are doing our little experiments through the meditation session, trying things out. On a collective level, we also experiment with things. We might try a retreat doing it this way or that way. We have to experiment with things to see what works, because we can't become ossified and too rigid, just doing the same thing the same way, year after year, decade after decade, because society is changing, people are changing, they communicate differently in different ways, without losing the spirit and the principles of our order and of our tradition. Without losing that, we still need to be adaptable, and we need to experiment with things, but in a very conscious way, and looking at what are the changes that come with that experiment. So that's a few broad brushstrokes over looking at the faculties as they influence Buddhist orders through the millennia, and also more recently in True Atma.